A wealthy tycoon showed off his mistress at a charity gala, leaving his wife behind. But what unfolded that night made him instantly regret it. The evening had only just begun, yet the air already promised luxury and hidden betrayals. The sprawling Lancaster estate, a modern masterpiece with towering marble pillars and a perfectly manicured garden stretching endlessly, was unusually still. The silence was broken only by the faint click of Vanessa Lancaster's heels echoing through the grand hallway. The scent of freshly polished wood mixed with traces of her favorite jasmine perfume lingered in the air. Everything in this house screamed wealth. And yet something vital was missing. Warmth. Vanessa paused by a large window, her eyes drifting to the soft glow of the sunset pouring golden light over the flawless lawn. Her silk gown, a subtle mix of cream and champagne gold, hugged her figure effortlessly. But it wasn't her beauty that caught people's eyes. It was her calm poise, a kind of quiet dignity that made strangers glance twice and wonder what secrets she kept hidden. She clutched the charity gala invitation tightly in her hand, her fingers pressing into the embossed letters as if hoping they could guide her next move. Her eyes shifted toward the solid oak double doors of her husband's study. Nathan Lancaster, her husband, the man who had once held her close on stormy nights, whispering dreams of a future they'd build side by side, now felt more like a ghost. Physically there, but emotionally absent. They hadn't really spoken in weeks, and tonight would be no different. But Vanessa was nothing if not persistent. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and made her way toward the study, knowing Nathan would be buried in spreadsheets and endless calls, orchestrating another corporate conquest. The door was slightly open, and she could hear the deep murmur of his voice. She knocked gently. "Come in," he said, without glancing up, his tone commanding and distracted. Vanessa stepped inside and paused at the doorway for a moment, studying him. Nathan was in his early 40s, but carried himself like a man who believed the world moved at his command. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, and his wristwatch, one of those rare additions that cost more than most people earned in a year, glimmered under the room's soft light. His dark hair was expertly styled, and his steel-gray eyes, once warm when they met hers, now looked cold and calculating as they flicked across the documents in front of him. She spoke, her voice soft but steady. Nathan glanced up for a moment, then went right back to his work. "What is it, Vanessa?" She held out the invitation. "The charity gala is tonight, I thought. It would be nice if we went together." Nathan leaned back in his chair, finally giving her his full attention, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only annoyance. "I can't. I have a business dinner with some investors." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd known this would be his answer, but it didn't sting any less. "It's important to me, Nathan. It's for the Children's Scholarship Fund. You know how much effort I've put into this." "I know," he said, but his tone was dismissive, as if all her work was just an insignificant side project. "But this dinner is critical for finalizing a deal. You can go without me." A knot formed in her throat, but she refused to let him see how deeply his disregard cut her. "Of course," she said, her voice perfectly controlled. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, Nathan spoke again. This time, a touch softer, though more out of duty than care. "I'll make a generous donation on our behalf. People will notice. Don't worry." Vanessa paused for a moment, then nodded without looking back. "I'm sure they will." Once outside, she let herself exhale slowly. The ache in her chest was all too familiar now, a constant reminder of who Nathan had become. The man who had once made her feel like the center of his world now treated her like a trivial afterthought. But tonight, she decided, would be different. She wouldn't cry inside their cold, empty mansion or drown in memories of what they used to be. No, tonight she would reclaim her pride. In a sleek penthouse across town, Camilla Hart slipped into her ruby-red gown in front of a full-length mirror. She was the type of woman who made heads turn wherever she walked, long legs, striking features, and a confidence that hovered between captivating and unapologetically bold. She knew her charm and wielded it freely. She had spent months weaving herself into Nathan Lancaster's life, the perfect mistress, attentive, alluring, and without the constant emotional demands of a wife. Nathan arrived at her door exactly on time, wearing that smug expression as he handed her a glass of red wine. "You look incredible," he said, his eyes roving over her figure with open approval. Camilla smirked back. "And you look like a man ready for a very good night." "Let's make tonight unforgettable," he replied, taking her hand as they stepped into the private elevator. Back at the Lancaster mansion, Vanessa stood in front of her bedroom mirror, fastening the delicate diamond necklace around her neck. Her reflection stared back at her, but she barely recognized the woman in the glass. Where was the fire? The spark that once made her believe she could take on the world. She drew in a deep breath and whispered to herself, "It's still there. You just have to find it." The soft rumble of the chauffeur pulling up outside signaled that it was time to leave. She grabbed her clutch and made her way to the car, her resolve growing stronger with every step. The ballroom of the five-star Grand Sterling Hotel was a dazzling display of extravagance, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and classical music drifting through the air like a gentle lullaby. Wealthy donors mingled, exchanging polite greetings and subtle boasts about their latest ventures. As Vanessa entered, heads turned. Not solely because of her beauty, though she was undeniably stunning, but because of the quiet elegance she carried. She spotted Nathan across the room, his arm wrapped around Camilla's waist, as they laughed with a circle of high-profile executives. For a fleeting moment, jealousy sparked inside her, but she pushed it away just as quickly. Tonight wasn't about him. It was about reclaiming her sense of self, her dignity. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes, but Vanessa waved him off. She had no intention of drowning her frustration in alcohol. Instead, she locked her focus on the mission she had planned so carefully. She smiled warmly at a group of philanthropists and struck up a discussion about the critical need for education funding. Her passion for the cause was genuine, and within moments, they were hanging on her every word. As the night unfolded, she moved gracefully through the crowd, leaving a lasting impression on everyone she spoke to. But the true highlight of her evening wasn't the polite conversation or the admiring glances. It was the quiet meeting she'd arranged with the event coordinator, where she sealed her commitment to a major donation, one big enough to shift the course of the entire night. Vanessa stepped back into the sea of guests, her heart pounding, not from fear but from excitement. She was finished being invisible. Tonight, she would remind everyone, including Nathan, exactly who she was. You won't want to miss what happens next. The ballroom of the Lancaster Grand Hotel was a shrine to extravagance, an opulent cathedral of wealth where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their riches under the guise of charity. Velvet drapes cascaded down the towering walls, while the glimmer of crystal chandeliers danced across polished marble floors, casting shimmering patterns on the gowns and tuxedos swirling beneath them. Conversations drifted through the air, punctuated by the clink of champagne flutes and sudden bursts of laughter. It was the kind of place where reputations were forged or shattered with a single, well-timed whisper. Nathan Lancaster stepped into the ballroom with the swagger of a man convinced the world was his personal stage. Clad in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, he looked every inch the commanding executive whose very presence demanded deference. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Camilla Hart, dressed in a crimson gown that hugged every curve and glittered under the lights, clung possessively to his arm. Her red lips curled into a sly smile as she scanned the room, drinking in the lingering stares that followed them. "You like the attention," Nathan murmured, his lips brushing close to her ear. Camilla smirked and tilted her head just enough to graze her cheek against his. "Only when it comes with perks." They drifted through the throng like royalty, pausing to shake hands and trade polite chatter with business magnates, society darlings, and ambitious politicians. To the bystanders, they were the very picture of refinement. But beneath the polished facade, their arrangement was as calculated as any deal Nathan had ever brokered. Camilla was there for the high life, the luxury, the spectacle, the thrill of being seen on the arm of a man who could give her anything she craved. Nathan, for his part, relished the jolt to his ego. She was a vivid counterpoint to the quiet steadiness of his wife, Vanessa, who hadn't stirred his excitement in years. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in a gilded mirror as they passed, a polished king at the center of his glittering court. For a fleeting second, a whisper of unease stirred in his chest, a memory of the vows he once meant with every fiber of his being. But he buried it quickly beneath the warm roar of envy, an envy-fueled admiration that followed him from every corner of the room. At that very moment, Vanessa Lancaster arrived at the entrance of the ballroom. She stepped gracefully out of a sleek black car, masking the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Her ivory gown flowed around her like liquid silk, and the simple diamond earrings she wore glowed under the grand entrance lights. As the doorman swung open the gilded doors, she drew in a deep breath, centering herself. This wasn't merely a gala for her. Tonight was her battlefield, and she was ready. Her eyes swept across the ballroom, searching the glittering crowd until they landed on him. Near the champagne fountain, laughing with Camila and a knot of wealthy investors. For a heartbeat, her chest tightened. Then she gathered herself. Tonight, Nathan's presence, or absence, would not define her. She let her eyes linger on the two of them, just long enough to feel the old ache twist beneath her ribs. Then she pushed it aside like a blade she refused to let cut deeper. Tonight, no whispered scandal, no flaunted betrayal would reduce her to a spectator in her own story. The auction portion of the night was beginning, and the crowd drifted toward the front of the ballroom, where a small stage, framed by gold curtains and bright lights, waited. A charismatic auctioneer took the microphone, cutting through the hum of conversation to introduce the first item, an exclusive painting by a celebrated contemporary artist. Bidding escalated immediately, paddle after paddle snapping into the air as eager socialites vied for the masterpiece. Nathan, lounging at the edge of the audience with Camila at his side, lifted his paddle lazily and offered a bid so steep it turned heads. Camila giggled, leaning close to whisper something that drew a smug grin from him. He didn't care a bit about the artwork. The thrill came from the admiring glances and murmurs that inflated his sense of power. Across the room, Vanessa watched it all unfold, her eyes steady, a flicker of pity tempered by a quiet steeliness. She hadn't come here to outbid anyone tonight, but that didn't mean she wouldn't leave a mark. As the auction continued, Vanessa moved gracefully through the crowd, mingling with key donors and board members, making sure her presence was felt without ever appearing flashy. Each polite smile, each firm handshake stitched a quiet message through the room. She was not some neglected wife to be pitied. She was a force with purpose, and tonight was proof that her dignity was not Nathan's to squander. Beneath her calm poise, her heart beat steady and strong, fueled not by revenge, but by a resolve to remind herself what power looked like when claimed on her own terms. The room burst into applause as the final gavel dropped on a diamond necklace, sold for an eye-watering price. Nathan leaned closer to Camila, brushing her bare shoulder lightly with his fingertips. "Ready for the after-party?" he murmured, though his eyes were already sweeping the room, searching for familiar faces to impress before slipping away. "Always," Camila purred back, flashing him a playful smile. Meanwhile, Vanessa had quietly stepped into a private room tucked behind the main ballroom, where a small circle of event organizers worked through the night's donations. She handed over an envelope containing her contribution, an amount so generous that the room fell momentarily silent. The lead organizer, a man in his 60s with a warm fatherly smile, took her hand and shook it firmly. "Mrs. Lancaster," he said, his voice brimming with genuine gratitude. "This is extraordinary. Your donation will change lives." Vanessa smiled softly but didn't linger to soak in the praise. A flicker of emotion crossed her eyes. Not triumph, but a quiet promise to herself that tonight would be the first step toward reclaiming pieces of the woman she'd almost forgotten. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," she replied, before turning back toward the ballroom. She knew that once her donation was announced later that night, it would send ripples of shock through the entire crowd and hit Nathan squarely where it hurt most. The evening carried on with an extravagant dinner served under the gentle flicker of candlelight. Guests savored each course while a small orchestra played a delicate symphony in the background. Nathan, meanwhile, grew increasingly restless, checking his watch, nursing his glass of bourbon, half listening as Camila's flirty chatter lost its sparkle. The buzz of conversation around him faded into meaningless static. He found himself glancing toward the entrance, half expecting Vanessa to appear and call him out in front of everyone. But he quickly dismissed the thought, convincing himself she wouldn't dare. Little did he know, Vanessa was already there, moving effortlessly through the room and slipping into conversations that actually mattered. She didn't need to cling to Nathan's arm to be seen. Her presence alone commanded attention. Toward the end of the night, the event organizer stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone to gather the crowd's focus. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm and welcoming, "tonight we have witnessed remarkable generosity. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the individual who made the largest donation of the evening." The room went still, a wave of curiosity sweeping through the guests. Nathan leaned back in his seat, a smug grin tugging at his lips. He was certain his name would echo through the hall. After all, he'd made a sizable donation earlier through his company. Camila squeezed his arm lightly, her eyes gleaming in expectation. "Please join me in thanking Mrs. Vanessa Lancaster for her extraordinary contribution, which will fully fund our new children's scholarship initiative." The applause thundered through the ballroom, but to Nathan, it sounded like the floor had vanished beneath him. His eyes widened as he stared at the stage where Vanessa now stood, accepting the ovation with the serene poise of someone who had nothing left to prove. Beside him, Camila stiffened, her fingers twitching slightly as the reality sank in. Nathan's mind reeled, trying to process how completely he'd misread her. He had written Vanessa off as insignificant, assuming she'd stay hidden in his shadow while he paraded his new lover around. Yet here she was, commanding the room without uttering a single word to him. As the applause roared on, Vanessa met Nathan's gaze across the ballroom. Her expression was calm, but her eyes spoke volumes. "You can ignore me, but you will never silence me." When the clapping finally faded, Vanessa returned to her seat, surrounded by donors and prominent guests eager to speak with her. Nathan, meanwhile, sat frozen, his thoughts swirling in a fog of embarrassment and disbelief. The night had veered so far off his script that for the first time in a long while, he tasted defeat. Not in the boardroom, but in the very heart of his life. Camila leaned in closer, her voice a hesitant whisper. "Nathan, are you okay?" He didn't respond. His eyes stayed locked on Vanessa, who had just reclaimed her crown with the quiet power of a queen. Too late, he realized she was no longer the woman who waited obediently for him at home. She was a force entirely her own. The next morning, soft dawn light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lancaster estate, casting golden rays across the marble floors. At the long dining table, Vanessa stirred her tea slowly, lost in thought. She wasn't really hungry, but her hands moved in steady circles as if stirring could quiet the whirlpool inside her. The applause, the admiring glances, and, most satisfying of all, Nathan's stunned face replayed in her mind. It had been exactly what she'd wanted. Yet satisfaction didn't quite capture what she felt now. There was a weight to taking back her place, as if she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and left behind the safe comfort of the woman she used to be. Even if she wanted to dwell on it, her phone buzzed gently on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from one of the event organizers, thanking her again for her remarkable donation and inviting her to a meeting next week to discuss future projects. Vanessa allowed herself a small, quiet smile before setting the phone aside. She was no longer hiding in the background, and people were noticing. Just then, the unmistakable sound of Nathan's footsteps echoed down the hallway. She straightened her posture, bracing herself. The dining room door swung open, and there he was, dressed in his usual crisp suit, his tie slightly askew, a faint sign he hadn't slept well. His eyes landed on her, unreadable but tight with tension. "Good morning," she said calmly, her voice steady as she lifted her teacup for another sip. Nathan walked over to the coffee station and poured himself a mug. His movements were measured, but Vanessa caught the small betrayals, the way his fingers clenched the cup too hard, the way he avoided meeting her eyes. "I suppose congratulations are in order," he said at last, his tone flat but edged with something darker. "For the donation, or the standing ovation?" Vanessa set her cup down with quiet precision. "Which one bothers you more?" He turned to face her fully, leaning back against the counter. "You planned that, didn't you?" She met his stare, unwavering. "Are you really surprised I did something impactful without asking your permission?" Nathan's jaw flexed. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Vanessa rose slowly, her chair scraping softly against the floor as she pushed it back. She walked toward the large window, her eyes settling on the garden where the morning dew still shimmered on the grass. "You didn't think I could surprise you? That's the real problem, isn't it, Nathan? You've gotten too comfortable, underestimating me." He didn't respond right away. The tension coiled in the quiet space between them. "Why now?" he asked, his voice lower, almost cautious. "Why pull this move now?" Vanessa turned back to him, crossing her arms. "Because I'm done waiting for you to see me." Her words hovered in the air like a gauntlet thrown. For a heartbeat, Nathan almost argued, ready to claim their marriage wasn't as broken as she painted it. But the image of last night shut his mouth. He'd ignored her for months, dismissed her patience, and paraded Camila around like a prize. What defense did he have now? He stepped closer, his expression softening just enough to show a flicker of the man she used to love. "Vanessa, it doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to turn this into a war." "A war?" She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Nathan, I'm not fighting you. I'm just done fading into the background." Her blunt honesty caught him off guard, and for the first time in ages, Nathan felt something he barely recognized anymore. Guilt. But it wasn't nearly enough to close the widening gulf between them. Later that afternoon, Vanessa sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of papers, folders, and old notebooks, all tied to the charity projects she'd poured herself into over the years. Most had been funded privately or from her own savings. She had never wanted to involve Nathan. But now, with her public donation from the Gala, she'd gained new allies and new resources. A quiet tiredness pressed against her ribs as she sifted through each binder and handwritten budget, her mind drifting back to the countless nights she'd worked alone, while Nathan entertained boardrooms and pretty distractions. She felt the old sting. But this time, it fueled her resolve instead of drowning it. A soft knock on the door pulled her back to the moment. A familiar face peeked in. Caroline, her best friend and fiercest confidant. They had met back in college and had been each other's anchor ever since, through secrets, heartbreaks, and every twist life threw their way. "I heard about last night," Caroline said as she stepped inside, her smile warm and proud. "You're the talk of the city, you know." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, exhaling a sigh. "Let me guess, half of them think I'm a saint, and the other half think I'm staging a power grab." Caroline chuckled, pulling up a chair beside her. "Who cares what they think? You did what you needed to do." Vanessa rested her elbows on the desk, fingers woven together. "It's not really about them. It's about Nathan. He looked different last night, like I finally caught him off guard." "Good," Caroline said without hesitation. "He should feel rattled. After everything he's put you through, he deserves it." Vanessa nodded slowly, but her mind kept turning. "Do you think I went too far?" Caroline shook her head, unwavering. "No, I think you finally went far enough. Don't doubt yourself now. You've waited long enough for him to see you. Now it's time you see yourself." A fragile smile tugged at Vanessa's lips as Caroline's words sank in, brushing aside the layers of second-guessing that had clung to her for so long. Maybe, for the first time, she was learning how to stand fully in her own light, with or without him. Her friend's words sank deep, lighting a fresh resolve in Vanessa's chest. This wasn't just about making Nathan notice her anymore. This was about reclaiming her life and rediscovering her purpose far beyond the ruins of a fractured marriage. That same evening, Nathan sat alone in his office, a glass of whiskey warming his hand as he stared out at the sprawling city skyline. The distant hum of traffic below was faint, drowned out by the chaos in his mind. He couldn't stop replaying the moment they'd called Vanessa's name at the gala, the quiet pride in her eyes, and the way the entire room had rallied around her, not him. He had spent years convincing himself that his success defined them as a couple, that as long as he provided financial stability and social status, Vanessa would be content. But he'd been wrong. He hadn't just ignored her, he'd underestimated her strength and her sharp mind. The knock at his office door was soft, but Nathan heard it. Camila stepped inside, her presence unexpected at this late hour. She wore a silk robe that left little doubt about her intentions. But tonight, Nathan wasn't interested. "I thought I'd drop by, see if you wanted some company," she said playfully, closing the door behind her and moving toward him. Nathan set his glass down and ran a tired hand through his hair. "Not tonight, Camila." Her flirty smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What's wrong?" He exhaled heavily. "Everything, it seems." Camila's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "This is about Vanessa, isn't it?" When he didn't answer, she stepped back, her posture stiffening defensively. "You're really gonna let her get under your skin like this? After everything?" Nathan stood, brushing past her as he moved toward the window, refusing to meet her gaze. "I think she's always been under my skin. I just never saw it until now." Camila scoffed, her tone sharp and mocking. "You're chasing a woman who's already moved on, Nathan. Don't expect her to wait around for you." Without waiting for a reply, Camila spun on her heel and left, shutting the door behind her with a crisp click that echoed in the room's heavy silence. Nathan stayed by the window, his own reflection staring back at him like a ghost. Camila's parting words replayed in his head, but it wasn't her bitter warning that lingered. It was Vanessa's voice that morning. "You've grown so comfortable underestimating me." For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. Meanwhile, the echoes of last night's applause still clung to the corners of the Lancaster Grand's ballroom, though the space now sat empty, waiting for its next glittering affair. But the shockwaves hadn't died down. Socialites, CEOs, and gossip columnists whispered over breakfast meetings and working lunches, analyzing the twist that had made Vanessa Lancaster the name on everyone's lips. Vanessa, however, was back at her home office, sorting through stacks of paperwork and answering emails. Sunlight spilled across her desk, warming her face, but her mind stayed locked on the practical tasks at hand. The gala had been an overwhelming success, far beyond what she'd hoped for. The donation would secure new opportunities for hundreds of underprivileged children. But more than that, it reminded everyone, especially Nathan, that she was far from forgotten. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at the screen, a message from the head of the charity foundation. "Thank you again for your extraordinary support. The board is excited to have you lead future initiatives." She smiled, setting the phone aside. But the flicker of triumph faded almost immediately. When it came to Nathan, there was always something left hanging, an unresolved tension that seemed to tighten with each silent morning and every cold glance. This house, for all its beauty, had become a silent battlefield. And Vanessa knew that when Nathan finally did choose to speak, it wouldn't be to congratulate her. She didn't have to wait long. By late afternoon, the soft hum of an approaching car drifted through the open window. She heard the front door swing open and close, followed by the unmistakable sound of Nathan's footsteps in the hall. He didn't come to her right away, which told her he was taking a moment to steady himself, no doubt tending to the bruise on his pride. When he finally did appear in her office doorway, Vanessa noted how he lingered there for a beat, gauging her mood. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, signs that this wasn't a business pitch. This was personal. "You've certainly made yourself the talk of the city," Nathan said as he stepped inside, leaning casually against the doorframe, though his tone betrayed the irritation simmering beneath. Vanessa set her pen down and folded her hands neatly on her desk. "Good. It's about time." He let out a short laugh, but there was no warmth in it. "You orchestrated that perfectly, didn't you? You knew exactly how to make sure everyone woke up talking about you." "I planned the donation," she said evenly. "The rest is just what happens when you do something that matters." Nathan pushed away from the door, taking a few steps closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Don't you think it's a little convenient, your sudden burst of public charity on the exact same night I brought Camila to the gala?" Vanessa didn't flinch. "And whose fault is that, Nathan? You brought her, knowing full well it would turn heads. Don't blame me for stealing the spotlight when you practically handed it to me." He turned toward the window, running a hand through his hair, trying to keep a leash on his frustration. "What are you trying to prove, Vanessa?" "Nothing," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you. I'm proving something to myself. Nathan's shoulders stiffened as the truth in her tone cut deeper than any argument. For a moment, a flicker of regret clouded his features, the kind that came too late, too shallow, yet still stung. The quiet certainty in her words hit him harder than he expected. He turned back to her, planting his hands on his hips. "So what now? Are we just going to keep circling each other until one of us gives in?" Vanessa stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress as she walked past him toward the window, her eyes settling on the garden outside. "There's no game, Nathan. I'm not here to compete with you, or with Camila. But if you think I'm going to fade quietly into the background while you flaunt her all over town, you're mistaken." She let the silence expand like armor around her, a shield she refused to lower this time. She didn't look at him, but she could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, trying to read her, trying to find the right thing to say. For once, she didn't feel any urge to fill the silence with explanations or apologies. She had spoken her truth. Now it was his turn to figure out what to do with it. Evening arrived carrying the same tension that had settled over them all day. Nathan retreated to his office, pouring himself a generous glass of bourbon before sinking into the leather chair behind his desk. The familiar burn of the drink did nothing to thaw the chill twisting in his gut. His mind kept replaying the scene from the night before. The way Vanessa had owned the room, how Camila had shifted uneasily at his side, and how the crowd's admiration had turned squarely toward his wife. The knock on his door jolted him out of his thoughts. For a fleeting second, he thought it might be Vanessa. But when the door opened, it was Camila instead. "Are you hiding in here?" she teased lightly, stepping in with a glass of red wine in her hand. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, like a cat circling its prey. "I figured you could use some company after last night." Nathan didn't answer right away. He watched her lean against the edge of his desk, her crimson lips curling into a smile that, once upon a time, might have stirred something in him. Tonight, he felt nothing. "Last night didn't exactly go according to plan," Camila continued, her fingers tracing lazy patterns along the polished wood. "Your wife really knows how to pull a crowd, huh?" Nathan sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Don't remind me." Camila tilted her head, studying him like she was trying to figure out what had changed. "You're not seriously letting this get to you, are you? You've always been the one calling the shots, Nathan. Don't tell me Vanessa's sudden moment has you second-guessing that." This time, when he looked at her, something shifted inside him. Irritation flared. Camila had always been easy, a pleasant distraction from the weight of his marriage. Now, her presence only reminded him of just how far things had unraveled. "I'm tired, Camila," he said flatly, his voice stripped of its usual charm. "I think you should go." Her smile flickered, turning brittle. "Go? You heard me." He stood up, making it clear the conversation, and whatever they'd been, was finished. Camila's eyes flashed with a spark of anger, but she smothered it behind a cold, forced grin. "I see? Well, I guess Vanessa's little show worked better than she expected." She grabbed her purse and walked out, leaving behind only the faint trace of her perfume. Nathan let out a shaky breath and dragged his hands through his hair. For years, he'd convinced himself he could control everything: his company, his marriage, his reputation. Now, it all felt like sand slipping through his grasp. The next morning, Vanessa sat in the garden, a cup of tea warming her hands as a gentle breeze rustled the blooming roses around her. She heard the familiar crunch of Nathan's footsteps on the gravel path and didn't flinch when he appeared at her side, looking rumpled but calmer than the day before. "Morning." "Morning," he said, his voice softer than usual. Vanessa took another sip of her tea, letting him speak first. Nathan lowered himself onto the bench opposite her, rubbing the back of his neck, a rare crack in his confident facade. "I ended things with Camila." Vanessa arched an eyebrow but stayed silent, letting the weight of his confession fill the space between them. "I'm not expecting you to forgive me," he continued quietly, "but I'm starting to see just how much damage I've done. And I want to fix it, if you'll let me." Vanessa set her teacup down, meeting his eyes squarely. "Nathan, fixing this isn't about asking for permission. It's about showing me that you can." He nodded slowly, understanding the quiet dare in her words. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he was willing to try. The setting sun cast the Lancaster mansion in a deep amber glow, spilling long shadows across marble floors and ornate decor that had once symbolized prestige and triumph. But tonight, the grand house felt less like a sanctuary and more like the backdrop for a reckoning that had been a long time coming. Vanessa stood before the fireplace in the vast living room, her arms loosely crossed as she watched the flames dance. The warmth barely touched her. Her mind was too busy bracing for what lay ahead. She'd heard Nathan come in nearly 20 minutes ago, the click of the door, the familiar echo of his footsteps down the hallway. And then, nothing. Silence. But she knew him well enough to recognize that quiet. He was collecting his thoughts, steadying himself for what he probably imagined would be a battle he could control. Vanessa sighed and poured herself a glass of red wine. The soft splash of the liquid in the glass was oddly calming. She took a measured sip, just as Nathan's silhouette filled the doorway behind her. He stood framed by the low light, his figure sharp, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. "Are you waiting for me?" he asked, stepping inside. His voice was calm, but an edge of strain crackled beneath it. Vanessa turned to face him, her expression giving nothing away. "I figured you'd want to talk. Eventually." Nathan loosened his tie and tossed it carelessly onto a nearby chair, then crossed to the bar cart to pour himself a drink. The clink of crystal against crystal cut through the quiet like an unwelcome reminder of how things used to be. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, after taking a long swallow of bourbon. "Start wherever you want," she said evenly. Vanessa replied calmly, "I'm curious to hear what you have to say." Nathan paced near the window, his hand clenching his glass so tightly she half expected it to crack. For a moment, it looked like he was weighing whether to lash out or tread carefully. He chose caution, but not without an edge of bitterness. "You've made your point, Vanessa. You've shown me you're more than capable of turning heads and shifting the narrative. Congratulations." Her lips twitched into a small, humorless smile. "This isn't about turning heads, Nathan. It's about reclaiming my place in a life I helped build and got shoved out of." Nathan let out a sharp breath and set his drink down on the windowsill. "So that's how you see it? That I pushed you out?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "You stopped seeing me. You stopped caring about what I wanted, what I needed. I became the woman who smiled at your company dinners and looked good in the background of your perfect life." He dragged a hand through his hair, his frustration spiking. "And what about you, Vanessa? Did you ever think about the pressure I was under? The deals, the deadlines, the investors who demanded everything from me?" "Yes," she said again, her voice steady but unyielding. "I thought about it every single day, and I supported you every single day, but when did that become an excuse to forget I exist? When did that become permission to bring another woman into our life?" Nathan flinched at her words, as if they'd struck him square in the chest. For a heartbeat, the full weight of what he'd done settled over him, and he couldn't even meet her eyes. But then, clinging to the last scraps of his pride, he pushed back. "I made mistakes," he said, his tone softer but still defensive. "But I never thought you'd humiliate me like that. In front of everyone." Vanessa stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. "Humiliate you? You think my donation embarrassed you? Nathan, you embarrassed yourself the moment you walked into that gala with her on your arm." His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. For the first time that night, he looked truly exposed. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa drew in a long breath. "That depends on you." The silence that followed pressed in from every corner of the lavish room, but Vanessa refused to break it. She had spent too many years cushioning Nathan's ego, smoothing his flaws, and offering apologies for the spaces where his love had failed her. Not tonight. Tonight he could sit in the discomfort of facing what he'd done. Nathan turned back to the bar and poured himself another drink, his movements slower now, weighed down by everything left unsaid. "I ended things with Camila," he murmured. Vanessa arched a brow. "And I'm supposed to thank you for that?" "No," he admitted, eyes downcast. "But it's a start." She nodded slowly, letting his words settle. "Why did you end it?" "Because it wasn't real," he admitted. "She was a distraction, an escape from everything. But it never meant anything." Vanessa crossed her arms again, her eyes searching his face for any flicker of sincerity. And exactly what were you escaping from, Nathan? Me? Our life. Nathan sighed, leaning back against the bar, his gaze dropping to the floor. Maybe, or maybe I was running from the version of myself I didn't want to face. The man who had everything and still wasn't satisfied. His honesty caught her off guard, but she kept her face composed. And have you figured out why you weren't satisfied? He looked up, meeting her eyes with a rawness she hadn't seen in years. Because I forgot what actually mattered. The words lingered between them, heavier than any apology. For a heartbeat, Vanessa let herself feel them, but she knew better than to trust words alone. Actions would decide everything now. She crossed to the couch and sat down, motioning for him to join her. Reluctantly, he did. The space between them felt like a canyon, but at least they were facing it together this time. Nathan, she said, her voice softer but steady, I don't need grand gestures or promises that everything will be perfect tomorrow. What I need is for you to understand that I won't live my life as your afterthought anymore. If you want to fix this marriage, you have to show me you can change. He nodded, his expression grave. I understand. Do you? She asked, her tone threading hope with skepticism. Because if you're just telling me what you think I want to hear, then we're wasting our time. I'm not, he said firmly. I know I failed you, Vanessa, but I want to make it right. She studied him for a long, quiet moment, searching for cracks in his resolve, for the old excuses that used to slip so easily from his mouth. When she found none, she nodded once. Then show me. As the night wore on, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft pop and hiss of the fireplace. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like a wall between them. It felt like the start of something. Whether it would become reconciliation or simply closure, Vanessa didn't know yet. But at least now, the truth lay bare between them. When Nathan finally stood to leave the room, he paused in the doorway and turned back to her one last time. Thank you, he said gently. For what? She asked, truly curious. For not giving up on me. His gaze held a mix of regret and gratitude that made her chest tighten, but she didn't rush to answer. Instead, she took another sip of her wine and watched him, letting the silence say everything she needed it to. Nathan disappeared down the hallway. Vanessa wanted to believe the sincerity in his eyes, but she knew only time would tell if his words would grow into real, lasting change. As she sat there, watching the last embers in the fireplace glow and fade, she felt a cautious mix of hope and realism settle in her chest. The road ahead would be long, but at least it had begun. Upstairs, the steady tick of a clock echoed through Nathan Lancaster's office. He leaned back in his sleek leather chair, staring up at the ceiling, as though the answers he needed might be hidden in the faint lines of the plaster. But there were no answers, only the steady ache of regret and a swirl of questions that wouldn't leave him alone. The past few days had upended everything. For the first time in years, he felt the edges of his carefully controlled world slipping from his grasp. Camila's number was still saved in his phone under the name Red Flame, a name that used to make him smirk. Now, as he stared at the screen's soft glow, it was just another reminder of a decision he wished he hadn't made. He hadn't spoken to her since ending things, and a small part of him wondered if she was furious or quietly relieved. In the end, it didn't matter. With a sharp sigh, he tossed the phone onto the desk and rubbed his temples, but the guilt clung to him like a second skin, too deep to shake off. For the first time, regret felt less like a fleeting inconvenience, and more like a truth he could no longer outrun. In the quiet of that office, surrounded by symbols of power and success, Nathan felt unmistakably small. Across town, Camila wasn't handling the fallout much better. She paced the wide expanse of her luxury apartment, her designer heels tapping sharply against polished hardwood floors. The framed photos on the walls, snapshots of sunlit beaches, rooftop parties, and glittering galas, felt like mockery now. She had spent months perfecting her role at Nathan's side, only to be discarded the second it became inconvenient. Her phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. She lunged for it, half hoping it was Nathan calling to beg her back. But it wasn't him. It was a text from one of her closest friends. You were right. Everyone's talking about Vanessa. She's the new darling of the charity world. Camila's jaw clenched. She deleted the message without bothering to reply. She knew exactly what it meant. Vanessa hadn't just reclaimed her place in Nathan's life. She'd stepped into the public spotlight too, and no one ever respected the mistress. Seething, Camilla poured herself a generous glass of wine and dropped onto the couch. "He's going to regret this," she hissed to the empty room, but even to her own ears, the threat sounded hollow. She hated how quickly her power vanished the moment Nathan's interest did. Hated that the world loved to watch her fall. But hate alone wouldn't be enough to bring him back. Back at the Lancaster mansion, Vanessa sat at her desk, phone tucked between her shoulder and ear as she spoke with one of the board members of the Children's Scholarship Initiative. Her posture was calm, her expression composed, but beneath it, a warm flicker of satisfaction glowed. This was what real triumph looked like, measured, graceful, and unshakable. And this time, it belonged entirely to her. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," Vanessa said warmly. "I'll see you at the meeting next week." As she ended the call, she turned and found Nathan standing in the doorway, watching her. He'd been doing that more and more lately, hovering at the edges of her space as if he couldn't decide whether he was welcome or intruding. "Busy day?" he asked, stepping inside. "Productive," she replied, leaning back in her chair. "What about you?" Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. "Met with a few clients this morning, but honestly I've spent more time thinking about us than about work." Vanessa studied him for a moment, her eyes softening but only slightly. "And what have you figured out?" "That I've spent too much time trying to fix everything with money and not nearly enough time fixing myself." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, though she didn't let it show. "I appreciate the self-awareness, Nathan, but words alone won't fix anything." "I know," he said quickly, "and I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I want you to know I'm trying." She nodded, acknowledging the effort but stopping short of promising anything more. "Good." That evening, the slow unraveling of Nathan's once bulletproof life continued in ways he hadn't seen coming. At the office, rumors buzzed just below the surface. No one confronted him outright, but the whispered gossip was unmistakable. Meetings were colder, conversations clipped, and even his assistants, who once hung on his every word, now seemed hesitant, as if they could feel the shift in power. The worst blow landed mid-afternoon, when his phone rang with a call from one of his oldest business partners. "Nathan," the voice began, cautious but unyielding, "we've decided to move forward without you on this deal." Nathan straightened, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you mean? We've been in this together for years." "I know, but the board has concerns. With everything happening in your personal life, it's just not good optics right now." His heart sank. "You're cutting me out because of optics?" "Don't take it personally, it's just business." Nathan ended the call without another word. For the first time in his career, he felt utterly powerless, like the walls of the empire he'd built were quietly closing in around him. He turned to the window, staring at his own reflection, and barely recognized the man staring back. This ghost of an executive looked nothing like the confident, untouchable figure he'd been just months ago. Later that night, Vanessa found him sitting alone in the living room, the lights off, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, and an empty glass dangling from his fingers. The sight of him like this, defeated, vulnerable, stirred something deep in Vanessa, though she couldn't tell if it was sympathy or something more complicated. "Rough day?" she asked, breaking the heavy silence. Nathan looked up at her, his eyes weighted with exhaustion. "You could say that." She hesitated, then crossed the room and sat down across from him. "You're not used to losing, are you?" He let out a low, bitter laugh. "Not like this. I thought I could juggle everything. Work, you, Camilla. But now, it's all unraveling." Vanessa leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Maybe that's the problem, Nathan. You've spent so much time trying to manage people that you forgot how to connect with them." He didn't respond right away. He swirled the last drops of whiskey in his glass, staring into the amber swirl like it might hold an answer he hadn't found yet. "Do you think it's too late?" he asked, voice quiet but raw. She weighed his question carefully. "It's not too late to change, but it is too late to pretend things can ever go back to how they were." He nodded, the truth stinging more than he'd expected. "I'm willing to do the work," he murmured. "I just need to know if it's worth it." Vanessa stood and walked toward the door. She paused, glancing back at him one last time. A wave of conflicting emotions rose in her chest. Sorrow for the man who'd lost himself so completely, anger for the wounds he'd left behind, and a tenderness she hated herself for still feeling. She pushed it down, choosing strength over softness, at least for now. "That's not a question I can answer for you, Nathan. You have to decide that for yourself." As she disappeared down the hallway, Nathan sank deeper into the couch. Her words echoed in his mind, each one pressing on the consequences of his own choices. But for the first time, he realized that the collapse of everything he'd built might not be the end after all. It could be the beginning of something new, if he found the courage to face it. Outside, rain tapped gently against the wide glass windows of the Lancaster mansion, the rhythmic patter filling the quiet living room. Beyond the panes, the garden was soaked, silver droplets weighing down the leaves of the rose bushes Vanessa had once planted with so much care. Inside, she curled up on the plush cream couch, a soft blanket draped across her legs, and a steaming cup of tea cradled between her palms. The mellow glow of a table lamp painted warmth across her features, but her thoughts were anything but calm. The past few weeks had been a storm of tangled emotions. Nathan's attempts to repair the damage had been steady but cautious, like he was tightrope walking over a deep chasm, terrified one wrong move would send him plunging back into chaos. Vanessa had watched him carefully, noticing the subtle shifts, the way he truly listened, the way he pulled back instead of pushing her for answers she wasn't ready to give. But despite the effort, the distance between them still loomed large, an invisible space neither of them fully knew how to cross. She let out a slow exhale and set her cup down on the table, the steam rising and fading into the dimly lit room, much like the certainty she once had about what came next. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Forgiveness, closure, maybe both. The truth was she didn't even know if she had the strength to decide. She had spent so long being patient, quietly hoping Nathan would one day see what he was throwing away. And now that he finally seemed to understand, she didn't know if it was enough. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She glanced over, her brows knitting in surprise. It was late. The house staff had long since gone for the night. Rising from the couch, she wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and went to the door. When she opened it, she found Nathan standing there, rain dripping from his hair, his suit soaked and clinging to him. "You're drenched," she said, stepping aside so he could come in. "What were you thinking, showing up like this?" "I needed to see you," he said, brushing water off his sleeves. "I didn't want to wait until morning." Vanessa led him to the kitchen, handed him a towel, and set a pot of tea on the stove. The kitchen, usually bright and busy during the day, felt small and warm in the glow of a single overhead light. Nathan rubbed his hair dry and settled at the island, watching her move around the room with a familiarity that twisted something in his chest. For a fleeting moment, he was transported back to the early days of their marriage, the nights they'd stay up late, drinking tea, planning the future they thought they were invincible enough to build. Now, when Vanessa placed a steaming cup in front of him, he wrapped his hands around it, soaking in the warmth. "I didn't mean to barge in like this." "You didn't," she said softly, sitting across from him. "But it's late, Nathan. What's on your mind?" He stared into the swirling steam, trying to gather words that felt too heavy on his tongue. "I'm afraid," he said at last, voice low but clear. Vanessa tilted her head, surprised by the raw honesty. "Afraid of what?" "Of losing you," he said, meeting her eyes, "and of losing the version of myself that you once loved." Her throat tightened. She looked away, focusing instead on the gentle flicker of the candle at the center of the table. "I won't lie to you, Nathan. I don't know if I can go back to who I was before, and I'm not sure I want to." He nodded, his fingers clenching around the cup. "I don't expect you to. I know I've put you through more than you ever deserved, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to build something real, even if it's not what we had before." Vanessa leaned back, folding her arms over her chest. "Why now, Nathan? Why did it take losing almost everything for you to finally see what was right in front of you all this time?" He swallowed hard, fighting to find the words. "Because I was selfish. I thought success would fill the emptiness. But the harder I chased it, the more I lost sight of what actually mattered. I thought I could have it all, Nathan said quietly. My career, my freedom, and you waiting at home. But I was wrong. Silence settled between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. Vanessa traced the rim of her teacup with her finger, her thoughts spinning too fast to catch. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this wasn't just another desperate promise meant to soothe the mess, only to fade once he felt secure again. But the scars he'd left weren't so easily undone. I can't promise you forgiveness, she said finally, her voice steady. I can't promise that things will ever go back to what they were. I'm not asking for that, Nathan replied. I'm asking for a chance to prove I'm not the same man I was. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the garden outside their window sparkling with droplets clinging to every leaf like tiny crystals. Vanessa stood by the glass, sipping her morning coffee as the world slowly woke up around her. Birds chirping in the hedges, the faint hum of city traffic drifting in through the walls of their quiet house. Nathan stepped into the kitchen, freshly showered, dressed simply in a crisp button-down and slacks. The tension from the night before still hovered between them, but something subtle in him had shifted. There was an intent in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I thought you'd be sleeping in, Vanessa said, her gaze still on the glistening garden. I couldn't, he admitted, crossing the room to pour himself a cup of coffee. Too much on my mind. She turned to face him, leaning lightly against the counter. What's your plan, Nathan? You say you want to fix this, but what does that actually look like to you? He took a slow sip, then set the cup aside. It looks like being here, not just physically, but really here. I've already started pulling back from unnecessary business deals. I've scheduled meetings with the families I hurt to apologize face to face and make things right, however I can. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. You're really meeting with them? Yes, he said firmly. I know it won't fix everything, but it's a start. Her chest tightened. Pride, hope, and an ache she didn't quite know how to name all mingling inside her. She wanted to believe him. Wanted so badly for this Nathan to be real. But the walls she'd built around her heart were thick. It would take more than good intentions to tear them down. I need time, she said softly. I understand, he replied. Take all the time you need. As he turned to leave the room, Vanessa's voice called him back. Nathan? He paused, glancing over his shoulder. Yes? I'm glad you're trying, she said, her words so quiet they almost vanished into the space between them. But don't do this just for me. Do it because you want to be better. He nodded once, her words wrapping around him like a heavy, necessary weight. I will. Then he stepped out, leaving behind the scent of fresh coffee and the first fragile promise of something worth fighting for. Vanessa sat back down at the table, her hands wrapped around her mug. The road ahead was still hazy, but for the first time in so long, she felt the faint stirrings of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Vanessa stood at the entrance of the community education center, the tall glass doors reflecting her own image back at her. Morning sunlight poured over the city, painting the sidewalks in warm gold as people hurried by, unaware of the private battle unfolding just beneath her calm exterior. Clutching the handle of her leather bag a little tighter, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. Instantly, the familiar hum of life grounded her. Volunteers moving briskly, gathering materials for the day's workshops, and the soft echo of children's laughter drifting from a classroom down the hall. The place pulsed with purpose, a sanctuary built for growth and second chances. She'd poured her soul into this project long before last night's fragile conversation with Nathan. But today, the work felt heavier somehow, as if the uncertainty of her personal life had crept in, weighing down what had always been her safe haven. Mrs. Lancaster, called Mr. Edwards, the head of the foundation, approaching with his signature warm smile. I was hoping you'd come by this morning. We've got a few new donors I'd love for you to meet. Vanessa returned his smile politely, though her heart wasn't entirely in it. Of course, she said. Let's make sure they feel right at home. They strolled down the corridor, passing murals painted by the kids in the program. Bright colors, playful shapes, hopeful messages scrawled in childish handwriting. A reminder of exactly why she had devoted herself to this cause in the first place. But no matter how hard she tried to anchor herself to the work, her mind kept drifting back to Nathan. She had seen the shift in him, or at least the start of one. His decision to sit down face to face with families whose businesses he'd hurt, to accept blame and offer real reparations. It wasn't something Nathan Lancaster of 6 months ago would have done. But was it enough? Could she trust that this version of him wouldn't vanish once the guilt faded? By midday, Vanessa was seated in the Foundation's small conference room, discussing expansion plans and scholarship opportunities with potential donors and board members. The meeting was productive, ideas flowed, goals were set, but an undercurrent of doubt clung to her like a persistent shadow. When it was finally over, she gathered her notes and made her way toward the front doors, her thoughts tangled in a loop she couldn't quiet. Just as she reached for the handle, her phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out. Nathan's name lit up the screen. Her thumb hovered over the answer button, hesitating before she pressed it. "Hi," she said, her voice cautious but calm. "Hey," Nathan said on the other end. A pause. Then, with a quiet urgency, "Are you free for lunch? I'd like to talk." Vanessa hesitated. "I don't know if—" "Please," he cut in gently, his tone almost pleading. "Just lunch. No pressure," Nathan promised, his voice earnest. Vanessa let out a soft sigh. "Okay, where?" Half an hour later, Vanessa found herself sitting at a small cafe tucked away on a quiet street corner. Unlike the upscale restaurants they used to frequent, all polished silverware and hushed servers, this place was warm and unpretentious, with mismatched wooden tables and the rich, comforting aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. It reminded her of the early days of their marriage, when afternoons like this were spent in cozy cafes talking for hours about everything and nothing, back when life still felt simple and wide open. Nathan arrived just as the waitress set a cup of tea in front of Vanessa. He looked more casual than she was used to seeing him. No tie, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the faint tan line of his expensive watch just visible. He offered her a small, almost shy smile as he sat down. "Thanks for coming," he said, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted, stirring her tea. "But here we are." Nathan nodded, his fingers drumming softly on the worn wood between them, a small tell that he was working through what to say next. "I know you've heard me apologize 100 times, and I know it doesn't mean anything without real change behind it, but I wanted to show you something." He pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and set it on the table between them. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, wary but curious. "What's this?" she asked, opening to the first page. "It's a journal," he explained quietly. "I started it after that night we talked a few weeks ago. I've been writing in it every day. Notes from the meetings with the families I hurt, reflections about how I ended up like this, and what I'm trying to change." Vanessa flipped through the pages, her fingertips brushing the slightly rough paper, each line filled in Nathan's unmistakable handwriting. Some pages held meeting notes, others carried raw thoughts that pulled at her chest. "I sat across from Mr. Palmer today, the man whose business I crushed without a second thought. He didn't yell or threaten me. He just asked one thing. How did you sleep at night, knowing you took everything from me? I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never will. Vanessa deserved better. I knew that the day I married her, somewhere along the way, I forgot. Now I'm trying to remember. I just hope it's not too late." She closed the journal gently, her fingers trembling a little against the worn leather cover. "You've been writing all of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day," Nathan said, his voice steady but soft. "It keeps me honest. It's not just about showing you I'm changing. It's about proving it to myself first." A lump formed in Vanessa's throat. She had waited so long for Nathan to truly see the wreckage he'd left behind, not just in her life, but in his own. And now, here he was, sitting across from her in a simple cafe that reminded her of better days, holding the beginnings of something that almost felt real. She saw it now, a man finally facing the shadows he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. "I don't know what to say," Vanessa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," Nathan replied gently. "Just know, I'm committed to this, whether you decide to give me another chance or not." The sincerity in his eyes squeezed at her chest. She wasn't ready to promise him forgiveness, not yet, but for the first time, she saw a version of him she could believe in. As they stepped out of the cafe, the cool afternoon breeze brushed against them, carrying the faint, clean scent of recent rain. They fell into step side by side, their strides sinking naturally like muscle memory. "Where do we go from here?" Vanessa asked, her eyes fixed on the uneven cobblestones beneath their feet. Nathan slowed, then came to a stop. Vanessa turned to face him, and the raw openness in his expression caught her off guard. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I'm ready to find out. One step at a time." Vanessa studied his face, searching for hints of the man who had hurt her so deeply, but all she found was someone trying. Someone battered by his own choices, but willing to piece himself back together. She drew in a slow, steadying breath and nodded. "One step at a time," she echoed. They continued walking, the path ahead still foggy with uncertainty, but at least now it was a road they both seemed willing to share. For the first time in months, the ache pressing on Vanessa's chest began to loosen, just a little. The road to forgiveness wouldn't be smooth, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth traveling. The first rays of morning light spilled through the sheer curtains of the Lancaster mansion, painting a soft, golden glow across the bedroom walls. Vanessa sat by the window, her fingertips idly tracing the edge of a book she hadn't really been reading. Outside, the garden hummed with life. Birds calling to each other from the rose bushes, the faint growl of distant traffic reminding her that the world kept turning, whether she was ready for it or not. Inside, though, everything felt paused, heavy with thought and cautious hope. Yesterday's meeting with Nathan at that small cafe had stirred feelings she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. It was hope. Yes, but fragile hope, like a candle flame flickering in a drafty room. She closed the book and leaned back into the plush chair, her mind drifting to the man who had once been her best friend, her confidant, and how far apart they had let themselves drift. A knock on the door broke the quiet. It was soft, hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure he'd be welcome. "Come in," she called, her voice calm but cautious. Nathan stepped inside, dressed in a simple light sweater and jeans, a far cry from his usual polished suits. He looked less like the commanding CEO everyone else knew, and more like the man who had once made her laugh until she couldn't breathe. The man who used to pull her into his arms and sway with her in their kitchen for no reason at all. "Good morning," Nathan said, offering her a small but genuine smile. "Morning," Vanessa replied, closing the book and setting it aside on the windowsill. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Too much on my mind." Vanessa nodded. She understood that feeling all too well. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit with me." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then crossed the room and sat down. The space between them wasn't as vast as it had been in recent weeks, but it still hummed with unspoken doubts and questions neither of them could rush to answer. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Nathan began, his eyes locked on hers. "About not doing this for you, but for myself." "And?" she prompted, leaning forward just slightly. "You were right," he said. "For years, I measured my worth by my bank account, my deals, how many people envied me, but none of it ever made me happy. It just kept me from facing the truth, that I was losing the things that actually mattered." Vanessa watched him closely, searching his face for the excuses she'd grown used to, but they weren't there. All she saw was a man who looked exhausted, not just physically, but soul-deep tired. Tired of running, tired of pretending, ready to stand still and face himself. And for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to see him not as the man who had broken her trust, but as the man who might, just might, be strong enough to rebuild it. "I'm not asking you to forgive me today," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the heaviness behind it. "I know that's something I have to earn, slowly, but I want you to know I'm doing this. For real." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, letting the truth of his words settle somewhere deeper than her cautious heart usually allowed. "It's going to take more than words, Nathan," she said softly. "I know," he agreed without hesitation. "That's why I've been working on something." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering across her guarded expression. "What do you mean?" Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle of folded papers. the edges slightly bent from being handled so often. He handed them to her, watching her face as she unfolded them, and read. The documents laid out a series of new initiatives: donations to families he'd wronged, mentorship programs for struggling small business owners, and a plan to redirect a significant share of his company's profits to community development and education. I've already started meeting with some of the families, he explained. Not just to write checks, but to apologize. To listen. Some accepted it, some didn't. But I'm not stopping. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around the papers as she read his handwritten notes, each line painting a picture of the raw, uncomfortable conversations he'd had with the people he'd hurt. One line made her pause, her throat catching around the words. Apologies won't erase the past, but they can be the foundation for a better future. She looked up at him, emotion tightening her chest. You're really doing this? I am, Nathan said firmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Because I want to be someone you can trust again. But more than that, I want to be someone I can trust. Vanessa set the papers aside and drew in a slow, steadying breath. The quiet vulnerability in his voice, the weight of what he'd done and what he was trying to undo, pressed against every scar he'd left on her heart. She had waited so long for him to look beyond his ambitions. Now that he finally had, she didn't quite know how to carry it all. I'm proud of you, she said softly, barely above a whisper. But you have to understand, this doesn't erase the pain. I know, he said quickly, his voice calm but resolute. I don't expect it to. I'm willing to take this one day at a time, no shortcuts, no pretending it'll be easy. She nodded slowly, the tight knot in her chest loosening by the smallest degree. Then, let's see where this takes us. The days that followed were a careful mix of progress and cautious hope. Nathan threw himself into the initiatives he'd laid out, spending long hours meeting with community leaders, sitting down with the families he'd once harmed, and showing up at charity events, not for the cameras, but to listen and help however he could. This time the work wasn't about headlines or social prestige. It was about real amends, and Vanessa saw that. She watched him from a quiet distance, noting the way he moved through each moment differently now. Not with the arrogance of a man who thought success was owed to him, but with the humility of someone who knew he had to earn it back piece by piece. It was a side of Nathan she hadn't seen in years, and it stirred something in her that caught her off guard. Admiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the garden's edge and the last warm hues faded into night, they sat together on the back patio. Nathan handed her a cup of tea before settling beside her, the soft scent of jasmine drifting in the gentle breeze. How was your day? She asked, lifting the cup to her lips. Busy, he said with a quiet chuckle, stretching his legs out and leaning back. I met with Mr. Palmer again. He was less angry this time. Vanessa smiled, a soft curve that reached her eyes. That's progress. It is, Nathan agreed, turning fully to face her now. His voice lowered, more thoughtful. But the biggest progress I've made is realizing this isn't just about fixing what I broke. It's about building something better than what we had before. She set her cup down on the table and looked at him, her eyes searching the face of the man she once thought she'd lost for good. Her gaze lingered on his, searching for traces of the man he used to be. But all she saw now was someone who had grown, someone who had stumbled, learned, and was still willing to keep learning. Do you think we can build something better too? Nathan asked, his voice tinged with equal parts hope and uncertainty. Vanessa didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, weaving her fingers through his. The warmth of his touch felt familiar, but different this time, like the first step toward something new. I think we can try, she said at last, her voice gentle but firm. But it's going to take time. I'm okay with that, Nathan replied without hesitation, as long as we're moving forward, together. They sat in a comfortable hush, the night wrapping around them like a quiet shield. For the first time in what felt like forever, Vanessa allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption wasn't an impossible dream. It was a path they could walk side by side, one careful step at a time. And deep in her chest, past the scars and old fears, a fragile hope stirred, reminding her that trust, when rebuilt stone by stone, could stand stronger than before. The crisp morning air carried the sweet scent of blooming magnolia as Vanessa sat on the garden bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Above her, the sky stretched wide and soft blue, while the dew clinging to the grass caught the sunlight like a scattering of tiny diamonds. But despite the peaceful beauty all around her, Vanessa's thoughts were anything but still. She had come out here for clarity, a quiet space to breathe and consider what lay ahead for her and Nathan. The past few weeks had been a rush of change, good change, but still change. For someone who'd grown used to the suffocating predictability of neglect, the sudden shift left her both exhilarated and a little afraid of what trusting again might cost her. She let her fingertips brush the bench's worn armrest, grounding herself in its solid wood, a small reminder that new beginnings needed roots as much as hope. The creak of the gate broke her reverie. She turned to see a courier approaching, a crisp envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Lancaster?" he asked, offering her the letter. "Yes," she said, accepting it with a polite nod. The envelope was unmarked, except for her name written in neat, careful cursive across the front. She flipped it over in her hands, feeling the subtle weight of the paper, heavy in a way that told her it carried more than ink alone. Slowly, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting struck her instantly. Nathan. Her heart fluttered in her chest as her eyes fell to the first line. "Dear Vanessa, by the time you read this, you'll probably be sitting in the garden, just like you always do when you need to think. I know this spot brings you peace, and I hope that as you read these words, you'll find a little more of it too. I don't know if I can ever truly make up for the hurt I caused you. I don't expect you to forget it. I don't expect forgiveness to be easy. But what I do expect, what I promise, is I promise that I will never take you or the life we built for granted again." When I first started this journey to fix what I'd broken, I thought the goal was to win you back. But now I see it was always about something bigger. It was about becoming the kind of man who could actually deserve you. I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it, growing through it, and showing the people you love that they matter more than anything else in the world. And you, Vanessa, you have always mattered most. Today, I made a decision. I signed over part of my company's shares to the education fund. This isn't just a donation, it's a commitment. I want to be part of something that gives back, that builds instead of takes. I want you to know that your vision for this charity is no longer just yours. It's ours. I hope this letter doesn't feel like a last-ditch plea or some desperate attempt to win you over. It's not. It's simply a promise, one I intend to keep. Thank you for giving me the space to change. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. And thank you for reminding me that love isn't something you're owed, it's something you earn. If you're ready, I'd love to meet you where it all began. The cafe where we had our first date. I'll be there today at noon. But if you're not ready, I understand. I won't push. Take all the time you need. Love. Nathan. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the letter into her lap. Her breath caught in her throat, a swirl of grief for everything they'd lost, hope for what they still might build, and an unexpected swell of pride for the man Nathan was fighting to become. She wiped a single tear from her cheek and stood, clutching the letter tightly in her hand. The cafe wasn't far from their home, but the short drive there felt impossibly long. Each stoplight and turn giving her heart more time to pound against her ribs. When she stepped onto the familiar cobblestone street, memories rushed in. Their first date, the shy laughter, the warmth of his hand closing around hers as they traded dreams about the life they'd imagined. It all felt so long ago, yet painfully vivid at the same time. She pushed open the cafe door, her heels clicking softly on the old wooden floorboards. The comforting scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sweetness of pastries behind the counter. Her eyes scanned the room. And there he was, Nathan, sitting alone at a corner table by the window, just as he had all those years ago. He looked up the moment she approached, a mix of relief and nerves flickering in his eyes. He stood quickly, smoothing his hands over his shirt as if steadying himself. "You came," Nathan said softly. Vanessa nodded, her throat too tight to trust her voice at first. She slipped into the seat across from him, her hands still clutching the letter. "I wasn't sure if you would," he admitted, his gaze searching her face. "I wasn't sure either," she whispered. "But I read your letter, and I realized the man who wrote it isn't the same man I've been angry with. He's someone new, someone I want to get to know again." Nathan's shoulders dropped as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I don't want to rush you, Vanessa. I know this won't be easy." "No," she agreed softly, cutting in. "It won't, but nothing worth having ever is." For a moment, they sat in an easy silence, the soft hum of conversation and the clink of cups filling the cozy cafe. Nathan reached across the table, letting his fingers brush lightly against hers. A small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they'd endured. "I missed this," he said quietly. "Me too," Vanessa murmured, squeezing his hand gently in return. They spent the next hour talking, about the charity, about the dreams they'd once sketched on napkins and late-night conversations, about the parts of themselves they'd lost and how maybe, together, they could find them again. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no accusations, no defenses, just honesty and the fragile beginning of trust. When they stepped back out onto the street, the sun broke through a patch of clouds overhead, casting a warm glow across the cobblestones. Nathan walked beside her, their fingers intertwined like they had been all those years ago. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning. And right now, that was enough. When they reached her car, Vanessa turned to him, her eyes clear, holding both love and caution. "This doesn't mean everything's fixed," she said, "but it does mean I'm willing to try." "That's all I need," Nathan replied, his voice steady. "One step at a time." She leaned in and kissed him softly, tasting coffee and quiet promises in the warmth of his lips. When she pulled back, she pressed the letter back into his hand. "Hold on to this. Remember what you wrote, especially when things get hard." "I will," he promised, slipping it carefully into his jacket pocket. They drove off in separate cars, but for the first time in years, Vanessa felt light, unburdened by what had been, open to what could be. The road ahead wouldn't be simple, but for the first time she truly believed they could walk it together. Because love, she realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. So the story is over, our wonderful friends, and if you're still here with me at this hour, it means something in this story must have touched your heart, even if just a little. I want us to pause for a moment and really hold that feeling. What did we witness through Vanessa and Nathan's journey? Not just betrayal and regret, but the slow, imperfect art of rebuilding what was broken. Starting first within ourselves. In life, like in this story, we often chase the wrong things. Status, validation, a sense of control, until we're forced to face the truth we've been avoiding. That real healing starts not with others, but deep inside us. Vanessa's quiet strength reminds us we are never defined by someone else's neglect. And Nathan's slow reckoning shows that true change takes humility and patience. It's messy, and it rarely happens overnight, but step by step, it is possible. As the philosopher Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." We may carry scars, but sometimes those scars let the light of new hope shine through. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. You have the right to demand respect, to rediscover your worth, and to begin again, no matter how late it feels. So if this touched you in any way, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that healing is possible, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Together, let's keep telling stories that remind us all that resilience, self-worth, and second chances are worth fighting for, one honest step at a time.